Awesome. I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'll let Kunal, or actually, I'll introduce myself first, and then I'll pass it off to Kunal. My name is Olivia Quesada. I work with the Taskar Center. I'm currently the Community Engagements and Partnerships Manager for the lab, and I'm super happy to have you all in this room and online with us today. I'll let Kunal introduce himself.
Hi everyone, my name is Kunal Mehta. I am a researcher and designer here with the Taskar Center. Um, uh, Thank you so much again for staying back for this session. I know we are coming towards the end of the day, and it's been a lot of content and a lot of sessions here. So thanks again. I know we had such a wonderful previous session. I don't need to say that we all have stories, because we all know that we all do know stories and we all have stories. But we all have, what we also saw was we all have stories within stories. Each of the stories, I'm sure, if we try to break each of those stories, there are at least 5 to 10 stories within each story, or at least maybe 3 to 5. So the idea today for this session is for us to reflect a little bit and use a tool called journey maps and see how do we prioritize what stories to communicate with decision makers. I know we have decision makers here as well, planners here as well. So how do we do that? And I guess next over to Olivia to take us through the next part.
Yeah, so what I have on the screen now is just a few objectives for the day. And like Kunal said, we all have stories, and we've just highlighted a bunch of those, but we want to continue the conversations we started on the panel. So we're going to be doing a bit of a group activity today. I want to really encourage some last bit of active participation, even though I know it has been a long day for everyone. So just while we work through this today, keep in mind a few questions. I have those up on the screen, and I'll read them aloud now. What can we do with this knowledge? Where are the biggest opportunities for change? And how might we present stories in a compelling way? So before we get into the activity, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an intro to journey mapping. A journey map is a visualization of the process that a person goes through from start to finish to accomplish a goal, or in this context, we'll be using it to talk about completing a trip. That can be just planning a trip, because that in and of itself is a whole process, as we have heard from our panelists. But it also includes the navigating between home and transit and navigating connections. So the full complete trip, and a journey map is helpful because by splitting up that journey, and it is such a big process, into multiple steps or phases, it'll allow us to look more closely at each of the individual interactions along the way, and also help us identify opportunities for improvement. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the slide, and what we have up here is an example of a journey map that's been completely filled out according to a story that we heard from Jeff on our panel previously. And I will pass it over to Kunal to kind of explain how he has filled out this story, and also maybe give a slight recap of what Jeff shared previously.
Thanks, Olivia. First of all, thanks so much, Jeff, for sharing the story beforehand. Really helped us prepare the content, and yeah, I want to say it's a wonderful story, but I shouldn't say that. But of course, it did help us do the content. So what we have is a journey map. Typically, there are different phases in a column. So taking a step back, we all heard Jeff's story where he was trying to get from Kirkland to Madison Park to see his grandson, and the good things that happened, the issues he faced, the things that went as expected, the things that didn't go as expected. We heard that, and we also heard those things in some or the other form in every story that was being shared. So what we have here is, and we'll have, all of us would do this together in a couple of minutes. What we have is different columns uh, that are filled by me. So, each column is a phase where phase 1 is planning the trip, phase 2 is getting to the bus stop and transit stop and taking the first bus, which was 2:55. Next was the transfer. Next, was the other bus, and last phase was the end of the journey or getting to the destination. Now, these phases are completely made up by me, and all of us can make up these because it is supposed to be reflective and interpretative. So what we want to do is for us to pick stories from on our table, and these could be stories that that are that were shared earlier by different panelists, or it could be a story that all of you on the table agree, or in the Zoom breakout room agree to do, and fill out the template. One big realization for me was, it was when I was trying to fill this out, was it's so personal that um, what is something that worked well for me could be that it didn't work well or according to somebody else it didn't work well. I've for example said in the first phase where using HopeLink or using Find a Ride, sorry, and planning the trip worked well, but maybe didn't work well for Jeff, and somebody else might interpret that in a different way. So it's totally personal, although we are doing that in groups, so some discussion, I'm sure, but we are filling this in groups, and we want to do like journey maps that can help us prioritize issues. So we all have a Google Sheet.
Yeah, so to the maps that are on the tables for in-person folks, we also have a link that is in the Zoom chat to a Google Sheets version of that for virtual folks, or for folks who paper is not accessible. You can fill it out that way. But like I said, we'd love if you worked in groups. We'll be we have a table set up in here, so you'll be kind of pre-grouped, but then we'll also have breakout sessions going on Zoom. And like Kunal said, we're just going to be breaking down either a story that you heard on the panel or maybe a story that is common among the folks at your table, and breaking them up into those different phases. However you may define them, it is totally subjective and personal to each of you. And then, you'll kind of go through exploring the positives and the negatives of each of those phases. And then there's also like midpoints or neutral feelings maybe. Not all of those boxes has to be filled in. Some of these may only have negative experiences when at a certain phase of the trip. They may also have only positive, so fill it out accordingly. And then when you finish, just maybe take a moment to explore the balance of how many positive interactions were there versus how many negative. And that can maybe suss out some of the themes and what were the negative or positive experiences. So we will give you probably about 15 minutes to do this. I know that we are running a little bit short on time, and I do want to let people go right at 4 o'clock to do a reception out here. So among tables, I think production will be splitting up Zoom breakout rooms that should assign you automatically. And then you can go to tinyurl.com/storytelling data sheet, and that will give you access to the online participation model. There's also markers and pens, I believe, and sticky notes if that's helpful on each of the tables. I'll kind of go around with Kunal and help, pop in with each table maybe. We'll do that until about 3:50, and then we'll kind of take the last 10 minutes, if that's okay with everyone, to share a little bit out about your experience making the journey maps and what you came up with.
for now, we want to get some thoughts on your reflections of doing this exercise. So we probably don't have the time to go into the stories, but any insights, any reflection, yeah, whatever you all want to share.
Yeah. Do we have any volunteers to maybe talk about the experience of the activity you just did? Doreen, up here. I'll have Kohei hand you a mic right behind you.
All right, so we spent a certain amount of time talking about Fifth Avenue in downtown Seattle. That was partly generated from the how do we model vertical issues things, because, and then we were talking about all the government buildings and whether there isn't curb cut are or aren't curb cuts, and by the way, there's some freeway off ramps, and so anyway, that was the discussion, and it was like, well, it was generated by the question about data modeling. I don't know whether we generated anything useful for data modeling, but that was that was one of the places we went. I don't know if anybody at the table wants to add or correct.
All right. Was the inconsistency of the down ramps on corners. Curb ramps, yeah, and I didn't even realize that because Seymour just finds them. But for wheelchairs, the different sizes, so that's like a work item, work action item.
Awesome. Do we have any other groups? Yeah, maybe back here. Thomas.
So in the journey map that we made, which was of a trip that Brian took last year, one thing that just came out of this at a high level for me, which kind of I remembered kind of reflecting on some of the experiences we heard earlier. In particular, apologies if I'm remembering the wrong name associated with the story, but I think it was Jill who spoke to moving to a mile outside of Monroe, a number of years ago, and then was driving at the time, and then lost the ability to drive, and kind of then having a new transit rider experience, in addition to the experience of working through the system not being designed for people with disabilities and presenting more barriers there, is just that the every new transit rider is going to encounter these barriers, and there's barriers just in being new to the system, and then all of these other additional barriers that deal with inaccessibility and barriers for people with disabilities are on top of what is already a difficult experience for a number of other reasons just by being new to this system. So those things compound.
I think it was maybe Amara or Tanisha who had brought up earlier, kind of just the resounding point of access is for everyone, and adding access for disabled folks does not take away access for able-bodied folks. So I think that's a really great point to carry out through the day. We've got Anna over here. Did we have another question on this way? Sorry, Laura.
I don't have a question. I was just going to report out what we said.
Yeah.
But we can
Please
go to
do.
Anna first.
No, sure, please. Sorry.
We also talked about Fifth Avenue near the buildings there that you have to access. And we heard a story from one of our table mates about how they take an extra 20-minute journey because they've figured out that tourist infrastructure is maintained better and more reliable than other infrastructure. And so they've catered their whole daily commute based on the monorail infrastructure, including the elevator there and the escalators, and then also the Columbia Tower food court area, and how the whole journey is basically a response to like being failed and wanting that consistency and finding it. And bathroom access also came up, which I will never stop talking about. So I want all the bathrooms, all 6 bathrooms we have in Seattle, and find a ride. But yeah, so it was just funny that the same Fifth Avenue stuff came up. Oh, and something interesting had to do with sidewalks and all of the different sidewalk surfaces being a hazard, again, for lack of consistency. And then, because you just in lack of predictability, and then also crosswalk surfaces as well. And if you're low vision or have any mobility issues, like lacking that consistency, it's really hard to make those adjustments without injuring yourself or being really stressed out about it.
Totally. There is a huge onus placed on the traveler to be anticipating all of those changes and inaccessibilities instead of having a transportation system that is always meeting the needs of the user. So that's a great point. And then did we want to pass it over back to Anna on this side?
Thank you. So we started having a conversation about land use, because that's sort of something that from the comments, I think with Judy's comment about moving, always intentionally looking for housing with transit access as a blind person, and then Jamin's comment about DC and the transformation, how accessible and that ease of transit there, and it made me think a lot about conversations I'm trying to have with my parents. So I grew up outside of Olympia in an area without transit, no sidewalks. I hated growing up there because I can't drive, and my parents wouldn't move for me, but now that they're getting older, they still don't want to talk about moving to somewhere with better access. And I feel like there's so much of our state that because there's just no sidewalks and it's outside of paratransit service areas, what kind of conversations are we having about land use and housing and ways to support people who want to move into housing that's closer in, but also way more expensive, or the difficulties of transitioning. So those are some of the pieces that we started talking about.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I personally, want to start looking for an apartment, and that's my single biggest criteria to be close to public transit. Yeah. Anyone else?
We did have one more. Yeah.
From the CTA Northwest conference in Ocean Shores, and I just was thinking about that, and there was an agency there, and I think it's an agency up north, but I cannot remember the exact name of the agency, but they actually sold the property that they used for their transit center to be used for tiny houses, because there was nobody really using the transit center because it just didn't serve a good purpose. And then doing that, it helped them access transit from so it provided housing, right? So they had this property, it wasn't being used. What can we do with it? It's, it didn't work the way we thought it would. And so now there's tiny houses on it. There's access to bus stops closer by instead of using a big transit center. So I just wanted to comment on that, because I think that that's something that's important for us to think about in transit. How can we bring the transit out to the people instead of always expecting people to come in to the service area. So
Awesome. And before we go, just wanted to reiterate what Kunal said. Tomorrow we'll be continuing this conversation, hopefully give people a lot more time to explore these ideas and also share out on them. Oh yes, please leave all of your paper artifacts if you'll allow me to steal them from you. I would love your data, please.